Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to our event this afternoon. I am Brian Golnick, and I teach in the Department of Spanish and Portuguese at the University of Iowa. I'm going to wait a few minutes while our webinar um, populates here. So we will give it a couple of minutes, a minute or two, to get people in before we enter into the primary introduction for our event. But while we're waiting, I will thank everybody for taking the time out of their day to be with us. And ahead of time, especially thank, of course, Professor Djamila Ribeiro for taking time today to be with us all the way from Sao Paulo, which is quite miraculous as always. We're now used to this, but when you think about it, it never ceases to be amazing that we are speaking live with Professor Ribeiro from Sao Paulo, and people may be joining us from many other places around the country and the United States and the world. So that is a great thing to participate in. Okay, I am seeing a marked slowdown in our populating rate for participants. So I am going to go ahead and begin with the formal introduction of our event. Once again, I am Professor Brian Golnick from the Department of Spanish and Portuguese at the University of Iowa. And I am very pleased to introduce today our principal speaker, Djamila Ribeiro from Brazil. Before she speaks, I want to give one moment to my colleague, Chris Lita from the University of Iowa, who's going to make a short announcement about our next event, which many people who are in this webinar today may find of interest. Chris.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. I would like to thank Professora Djamila for being here today to agree to talk to us here at the University of Iowa. And the short announcement I have for you today is, if you like this event, we have a similar one with Professor Conceição Evaristo on May 4th from 4 to 6:30 p.m. Iowa time. If you are in Brazil, it's going to be from 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. You will have more information about that on the internet and the website of University of Iowa. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Chris. Okay, I am going to give a brief introduction to Professor Ribeiro, and it will be brief because none of you signed up to see me today, right? So I'm going to be brief. But it is truly an immense honor for us to host this conversation with Djamila Ribeiro. Before I go any further, I need to thank the University of Iowa's interdisciplinary programs, and specifically Latin American Studies, along with the Department of Spanish and Portuguese at the University of Iowa. It was their generous financial support which helped us to bring this event to enrich our community today. And I think we all agree that everybody is better off and stronger when we can understand our world through a wider lens. And that is exactly what Djamila Ribeiro is going to bring to us today, a wider and clearer lens on our world. Before I forget to mention it, you will all know that by now, if you've been in a webinar, that there is a Q&A feature at the bottom on Zoom that you can submit questions for. And Chris Lita and I will adjudicate the questions for and present them to Professor Ribeiro at the end of her talk. But that's down at the bottom of your screen. So if you have a question that occurs to you during the talk, please feel free to submit it. Okay, Djamila Ribeiro is from Brazil. Brazil is the most geopolitically important country in Latin America. Djamila is one of the most important voices today in Brazil. And that combination means that she is one of the most important voices in our hemisphere. Djamila Ribeiro is an extremely good example of what it can mean to be a public intellectual. Being a public intellectual at all today is, I think, an amazing feat in a world that is constantly distracted with nonstop entertainment options on the internet. So to bring any intellectual discourse into that world is of itself a great achievement. But being a public intellectual in Brazil, where it has been such a long and hard fight for African descended people to be recognized as either intellectuals or public figures, is extremely notable, to say nothing of what it means to be an African descended woman in a context where being an intellectual or a public figure of note in any sense is a very, very difficult task. Djamila is a social philosopher. She teaches at the Universidade de São Paulo, and she has a regular column in the Folha de São Paulo, which is Brazil's most significant national newspaper. She edits a book series called Feminismos Plurais, which puts the work of women from the African diaspora into the hands of thousands of people. This is a project which is also actively helping to push the publishing world in Brazil towards greater diversity, which is something that it desperately needs, as does our publishing industry in the United States as well. So this is a model project for how to move the marker in that really important area. In addition, she organizes short courses related to those books from Feminismos Plurais, and her own writings have won recognitions around the world, including from the Prince Claus Foundation in the Netherlands in 2019. And just this year, her most recent book, which is a Pequeno Manual Antirracista, was awarded the prestigious Jabuti Award in Brazil, which is Brazil's equivalent of the Pulitzer Prize in the United States. So that's a national book award given in a series of categories. She is, without a doubt, the most visible figure today advocating Afro-Brazilian feminism. And her other books, Lugar de Fala, which I would translate as Site of Enunciation, and Quem Tem Medo do Feminismo Afro-Brasileiro, which is this great book here, available at least recently on Amazon. So if you're Lusophone, it's not inaccessible to you. These books are helping to recognize a tradition of thought and a tradition of activism related to African descended women in Brazil. That tradition includes very actively a hemispheric and global conversation. And that is a dialogue that we are going to be very pleased to participate in our own small way from Iowa City here today. So without further intervention on my part, I will hand you all over to Professor Ribeiro. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Brian, for this kind presentation. First of all, I'd like to thank University of Iowa, especially Latin America Studies Program, Department of Spanish and Portuguese for this invitation. Special thanks for Professor Cristiane Lira and Professor Brian Golnick for this opportunity to exchange knowledge. Also, I'd like to thank the students of the Black Female Rights course. I'm very glad to be here today, even remotely, to present some of my work and some Afro-Brazilian thinkers who are very important to Black feminism, not only in Brazil, but in Latin America. Before I start, I hope you are fine and safe, especially now in this moment that we are facing. Here in Brazil, we are facing a very difficult time because of the pandemic. The Black people, indigenous people are the most affected by the pandemic. A lot of people, unfortunately, are dying in Brazil, thousands of people each day dying in Brazil. So to be here today and have the opportunity to do this talk is not only an opportunity to exchange knowledge, it's above all, it is a statement of resistance to be here today and to talk about Black Brazilian women. So thank you for that. I will ask for Breno, my assistant, to share the screen. I prepared the presentation for you. Okay. So myth is about Black Brazilian women, a view from the Black feminist theory. So I'm going to present for you. I don't know if you know, but if you don't know, I always start with Lélia Gonzalez, who was a very important Black feminist in Brazil. And her work is fundamental for the Black feminism in Latin America. Because of the epistemicide is a concept created by Boaventura Sousa Santos, who is an intellectual from Portugal. But in Brazil, this concept was spread by Sueli Carneiro, who is another important Black intellectual in Brazil. And epistemicide, what it means, it is the invisibilization of the knowledge of Black people and indigenous people and Black women. As Sueli Carneiro used it to say, epistemicide kills our rationality, damage the way we see ourselves. And how in Brazil, even being a country that the majority of the population is Black, our academia is Eurocentric, white male dominated, and how Lélia Gonzalez, even in Brazil, is not recognized as she should be. So it's very important to talk about epistemicide and being a Black woman from the global South, how it's important to have the opportunity to speak with the global North. And this concept of epistemicide also needs to be understood in the global North, how usually people from United States or from Europe, they don't know what you are producing here in Brazil because we are thinking Portuguese, the Brazilian Portuguese, and how it's important to exchange knowledge. We are here reading about United States, reading Black intellectuals from United States. So how it's important to people in the United States to know about us, because we are also America. You are in South America. And what is America? South America is also America. And Lélia Gonzalez, she was a pioneer in the articulation of, to think gender, race, and class, the capitalist exploitation. She was speaking about intersectionality in the 80s, but again, as she was thinking in Brazil, in Portuguese, her productions are not known abroad. So how it's important to put Lélia Gonzalez not only as very important and fundamental Brazilian thinker, but as a thinker, an international thinker, as she was in the 80s, was writing about transnational struggle. As in the 80s, she was criticizing what she used to call as missionary behavior from the global North. So she's a pioneer, and that's why I start with her. And I love this quote of Lélia Gonzalez. I'm going to read. The risk you run here is all that's implied in the act of speaking. We have been spoken about, infantilized. An infant is someone who cannot speak. A child is someone who can only speak through someone else, because adults speak on their behalf. precisely because of this infantilization, we are taking back our own speech in this work. That is, what has been assumed to be garbage is talking back, and it's about time. So how powerful is this quote? Lélia Gonzalez, she has another quote, I think it's very important, when she said, our legacy is not only a legacy of pen. We don't only share histories about slavery, about colonialism. Our legacy is also a legacy of resistance. So when she says that, she's saying that it's important for us as Black people, Black women, to restitute, to restitute our humanity. We are also subject of our history, not only object of colonialism. So you find in this presentation this perspective of Lélia Gonzalez in different ways when she talks about language, when she talks about the Black women. So I will ask you to pay attention in this perspective of Lélia Gonzalez. Yes, we need to talk about the oppressions, of course, because this oppression affect us, our lives, but also we needed to talk, you needed to speak, you needed to write, we needed to speak through our perspective because we are subjects of this history. So I began with Lélia Gonzalez, one of the greatest thinkers of Brazilian Black feminism, professor in the Department of Sociology at the Pontifical Catholic University of Rio de Janeiro. Gonzalez, as we shall see, is the author of founding texts on concepts and perspectives of international feminist thought and opened the way for many of us in Brazil to continue the fight for our existence, knowledge, and new possibilities. Pode passar. So, Lélia Gonzalez, I think it's important to say that even in Brazil, even in the progressive side, people do not understand sometimes about Black feminism because they don't read about Black feminism. And usually they think that in Black feminism, we are not talking about class, for example. And it's impossible because it's an intersectional perspective. We are talking about articulation of class, gender, and race. So we talk about class. The thing is, we think that the discussion on class needed to be inseparable of the discussion on racism and sexism. It's completely different. Lélia Gonzalez was very attacked in Brazil by many groups, conservative groups, by left-wing thinkers, by men in the Black movement, because for Lélia Gonzalez, she is not enough to think strategies to confront one oppression if the capitalist exploitation, racism, and sexism are structural oppressions. We needed to find a way to confront all of these oppressions. So thinking Black feminism for Lélia Gonzalez is to think about democratic projects, is to think about a new project of society, and not only about the oppression that we think that is the most important. For us, that is not the most important oppressions if they acted inseparable. That's why Black women is the basis of the society, because Black women intersect these oppressions. So how it's important to think about Black feminism as a democratic project, in not only identitary project, as some critics sometimes say, denying the fact that whiteness is identity, masculinity is identity. So it's that's this project that I'm going to present to you today as Lélia Gonzalez thought. So the myth of the universal woman, that in Brazil, the hegemonic feminism during a long time insisted in this myth that we are all women, and the contributions of Black feminists as a whole started to question the universal subject assumed to be white, European, or from the global north, male, as well as to put in check the universalization of women as a category. If, on the one hand, Simone de Beauvoir, in her work, The Second Sex, when thinking about the condition of women, defined her as being the other in relation to man, that is, one that is not thought of in itself, but in function of man, Grada Quilomba, interdisciplinary thinker based in Germany, sophisticates the analysis to think of Black women as the other of the other, since it is the double antithesis of whiteness and masculinity. And this is a quote, Grada Quilomba quote: because they are neither white nor male, Black women occupy a very difficult position in white supremacist society. We represent a kind of double deficiency, a double alterity, since we are the antithesis of both whiteness and masculinity. In this scheme, the Black women can only be the other and never herself. White women have an oscillating status, both as themselves and as the other of the white man, since they are white but not men. Black men play the role of opponents of white men, as they are possible competitors in the conquest of white women, since they are men but not white. Black women, however, are neither white nor men, and they function as the other of the other. Grada Quilomba in Plantation Memories, Episodes of Everyday Racism. Sueli Carneiro in Brazil, questioning the universalization of women as a category, in the article Enegrecer o Feminismo, Blackening Feminism, the Brazilian philosopher Sueli Carneiro, a memorable Brazilian Black feminist, poses the quick question: which women are you talking about when you are talking about women? So for Black feminists, it's important to name the oppression. It's important to name these subjects that are in the crossroad. So I quote Sueli Carneiro: when we speak of the myth of female fragility, which historically justified the paternalistic protection of men over women, which women are you talking about? We Black women are part of a contingent of women, probably in the majority, who have never recognized this myth in themselves, because we have never been treated as fragile. We are part of a contingent of women who worked for centuries as slaves in the fields or on the streets, as salespeople, grocers, prostitutes, women who didn't understand anything when feminists said that women should win the streets and work. We are part of a contingent of women with object identities. Yesterday, at the service of fragile ladies and pervert sugarcane mill masters. This new feminist and anti-racist look, by integrating in itself both the struggle traditions of the Black movement and the tradition of struggle of the women's movement, affirms this new political identity arising from the specific condition of being a Black woman. End of the quote. So Sueli Carneiro, in the 90s, she was questioned which women are you talking about, and bringing importance to think about intersectionality. Pode passar. So the imposition of silence. These women, they were inviting us to refuse the imposition of silence. But this silence against the colonial system designed to stifle their voices, Black women continue to challenge the contest updates of the Mask of Anastasia, the enslaved, conceived by Brazilian sugarcane mill masters for the enslaved women of uncomfortable words, for which, in order to be silent, the mask was designed so that she could only breathe and do not emit the sound of her voice. So of course, these women, they are fighting against the imposition of silence, the imposition of colonialism, who silent us historically. But also these women, they were fighting against the silence of the universalization of category, because the feminist movement, they were saying that we need to choose which oppression is more important, is the most important. If you are Black and poor and women, all these oppressions are important. So when questioning the universality of women, these thinkers were also fighting against the imposition of silence, even in the social movement, that still resists to think in an intersectional way, that still resists to think that Black woman is a political subject, is an epistemological subject, that still think that they are universal and the rest is specific. They don't see themselves as specific as well. The white man sees himself as universal, and he points out to a Black woman and say, you are specific because you are a Black woman. He points out to a white woman and say, you are specific because you are a woman. I am universal. And they don't see themselves marked by identities too. They don't see themselves as specific. So it's impossible to think about a project of society without thinking about this oppression, without confront the imposition of silence, because it's not only a silence to stop us to talk. Is the silence also on our existence that does not allow another possibilities of existence. So to break this silence is to fight for our restitution of humanity as Black women, as Black men, as group that intersect oppressions. Deixa eu passar. So I think it's important also to explain the context of the racism in Brazil. In Brazil, we have sous-generary racism. The myth of racial democracy in Brazil was a myth that was historically legitimized here in Brazil, and that damaged our awareness on Blackness to understand the racism in Brazil. So on top of the silence, Brazil, the country of soccer and samba, usually people only see Brazil in this perspective, exported the image in which white and Black people coexisted harmoniously, in an harmonical way. Drink beer around the table and playing cavaquinho, while the mulatto woman danced samba happily. This romanticization of race relations in Brazil, discussed in the work Casa Grande Senzala, The Master and the Slaves, by the Brazilian sociologist Gilberto Freire, was called Myth of Racial Democracy. Gilberto Freire, he hasn't talked about racial democracy, but his book was a basis for this myth. This idea that here in Brazil there is no racism. During a long time here in Brazil, the propaganda was racism in Brazil, no, racism in the United States, racism in South Africa. In Brazil, we are a mixed people. Everybody lives together, and we don't have racial conflicts during a long time. An intellectual elite in Brazil spread this idea of racial democracy, and the Black intellectuals, Black female intellectuals in Brazil were very important to confront this idea. Brazil was the last country in Americas to end slavery. Here in Brazil, there was not an apartheid like United States that was institutionalized by laws. It was different. But I think it's very important to mention how the laws in Brazil institutionalized an apartheid. In Brazil, it's not sad, it's the non-sad thing. An example, there was a law, a 1824 law, it was a law by the Republic Constitution. And this law was established that time, in 1824, only free citizens could have the right to study, only free citizens. Well, who were free citizens in 1824 when we were living under slavery? Well, white people were free citizens. So they didn't put that in the law. Black people is prohibited to study. It was not there, but what they did, only free citizens can study. It's a different way to say that Black people couldn't study. We have, there was another law that can be an example, the 1850 land law in Brazil. From this law, only people who could afford, who could buy law from the state could have access to land. Well, we were under slavery time in 1850 in Brazil. Black people in Brazil were slaves. It means that they didn't have money to afford. So it was not necessary to write there, Black people cannot have access to land. You write there, only who can buy lands, you have rights to land. In 1850, Black people was under slavery. So until today in Brazil, housing is a problem for Black people. Most of the homeless people are Black in Brazil. Most of the people who live in slums are Black in Brazil. So in Brazil, this romanticization, this not sad thing was the institutional way to deal with racism in Brazil. Pode passar. So you have another quote here by it's Kabengele Munanga, who is a very important intellectual in Brazil. He's from Congo, but he is professor at the University of São Paulo. In As Ambiguidades do Racismo Brasileira, The Ambiguities of Brazilian Racism, the great intellectual Kabengele Munanga summarizes the power of the myth. Like all myth, it works as a belief, a true reality, an order. Hence, the difficulty is getting any Brazilian to confess to racism. The myth proclaimed in Brazil a racial paradise where relations between white and black people, white people and indigenous people, etc., are harmonious. That is, without prejudice and without discrimination, except for socioeconomic order, which affects all Brazilians and is not based on skin color. In order to consolidate and become increasingly stronger, the myth manipulates some facts, evidence in the reality of a Brazilian society, such as miscegenation, mythical personalities and symbols of Black cultural resistance in the country. It will say that we are a mestizo people that is neither white, neither Black, nor indigenous. A new Brazilian race, a mestizo race, will discriminate against whom if you are all mestizos. End of the quote. So this idea of this romantic idea of miscegenation in Brazil, that you are all mixed people, served to consolidate this idea that there is no racism, because if there is the recognition of races, it is going to be necessary reparation of all these years of discrimination. So here in Brazil, they denied the fact that the miscegenation in Brazil started as rape of Black women and the slavery time. So this idea to romanticize violence relations in Brazil was very strong, and it dificulted to raise awareness on racism in Brazil, even for Black people. We have here in Brazil, the discriminations in Brazil is about the way you look. Your mother can be Black and your father can be white, but if you look like white, you are going to be treated as a white person. And light-skinned Black people in Brazil, during a long time, didn't see themselves as Black. The work of Black movement in Brazil was very important to raise awareness on Blackness. And if today most of the people in Brazil declare themselves as Black, it's because of the work of Black movement in Brazil, refusing this idea of racial democracy. Próximo, por favor. So Munanga's brilliant synthesis reveals the sophistication of this myth, so damaging to race relations in Brazil. Gonzalez, from a Black feminist perspective, this myth states in Racismo e Sexismo na Cultura Brasileira, Racism and Sexism in Brazilian Culture, and I quote, like every myth, that of racial democracy hides something beyond what it shows. In a first approximation, we find that it exercises its symbolic violence in a special way on Black women. For the other side of carnival, deification takes place in this woman's daily life at the moment when she becomes a maid. That is, where the guilt engendered by this deification is exercised with strong charges of aggression. It's also there that is verified that the terms mulatto woman and maid are attributions of the same subject. That's why Lélia Gonzalez, in her work to explain the Brazilian society, she explained through the role of Black women in Brazil, through these stereotypes that you are the maid, submission place, or you are the mulatta woman, this objectifying place, the sexualization place. So to explain the Brazilian society, you only can understand if you understand the role of Black women, who intersects these structural oppressions. Próximo, por favor. So This is the idea that some people have about Black women. I had the opportunity to travel abroad a lot. And when I say that I am Brazilian, people, oh, Brazil, dance samba. So people think that we only serve for that. And how people treat Brazil as a place of sex tourism, as a place to exploit women, especially Black women and poor women, and how it's important to refuse this idea of sexualization, ultra-sexualization of Black women, the way we are seen abroad. Even here in Brazil, people see Black women through these stereotypes, but this image was sold abroad, the mulatto woman. So the myth of the Black mother is another myth that Lélia Gonzalez explained to us, that here in Brazil was created on Black women, especially dark-skinned women. In the exported image of Brazilian racial democracy, white and Black men laugh at the sound of samba while the naked mulatto woman dances. If, on the one hand, the mulatto woman is confined to the place of hypersexualization, on the other, there is no room for Black women who is a maid, even in the image sold abroad. However, despite having their life silenced, these women are many. According to researcher Juliana Teixeira from the Federal University of Espírito Santo, in her book Trabalho Doméstico, Domestic Work, there are currently more than 4 million predominantly Black women working as maids in the country. A small number due to the pandemic that left 1.8 million unemployed. Women who are the breadwinners. For these women, uninvited to the Democratic Party, another place for the construction of races is reserved, the place of the Black mother. Próximo, por favor. And I quote Juliana Teixeira, Black mothers were the expression of the docility expected from enslaved Black people, because she did not represent the racist stereotype of the immoral slaves. The slave with the curvaceous body was not idealized for sexual servitude and therefore was not constituted as a threat to the noble ladies. Nor did she represent the stereotype of demonic slaves, who were quilombolas, Afro-Brazilian residents of Quilombo settlements, and fugitives. They are strongly in the childhood memories and nostalgias of Brazilian writers in the 1930s to 1960s, such as Carlos Drummond de Andrade, José Lins Lorrego, and José Américo de Almeida, who were important rights in Brazil. So this idea of docility, that they expect Black women, dark-skinned women, to take care of everybody. Black women, white people usually remember, I have a Black mother and she was so good to me, she raised me, this romantic idea, denying the fact that these women were there because it was a place imposed by racism, sexism, and capitalism. Próximo, por favor. And Lélia Gonzalez, she's very genius to see that these women were not these, these docile women, these women who were so kind. This idea created by the white society. As I said in the beginning, for Lélia Gonzalez, it's important, of course, to analyze the legacy of slavery and racism, the legacy of oppression, but also the legacy of resistance, that these women are also subjects. So regarding the Black mother, Gonzalez says that she, in fact, was the mother of Brazilian culture, as she was the one who breastfed, bathed, cared for, put to sleep, and told stories, while white women served, oddly enough, just for giving birth to the children of the masters. Because they were the mothers, they taught the language culture, Portuguese, a language is still spoken today, that is decisive influence of Black and Indigenous culture in the colonial language, constituting a language of its own spoken throughout the country. So for Lélia Gonzalez, it's important to highlight how these women also influence the culture. They are not just objects, but subjects. And yes, we speak Portuguese because we were colonized by Portuguese people, but we do not speak the Portuguese from Portugal. We speak Brazilian Portuguese, we speak Portuguese, in English, something like Black English. There is influence from African language in Brazilian Portuguese, languages for indigenous people in Brazilian Portuguese. And Lélia Gonzalez used to say, the white society do not realize that they speak Portuguese, that they don't see our contributions from in Brazilian culture. That's why for her, this Black woman is the mother of the Brazilian culture. Próximo, por favor. So this is a quote when Lélia Gonzalez explained about the Portuguese. It's funny how the elitist white society make fun of us when we say Flamengo. Flamengo is a very popular soccer team in Brazil. We write with L instead of R, but she will explain why people say that. It's funny how the elitist white society make fun of us when we say Flamengo. They call us ignorant, saying that you can't speak correctly. And suddenly they are unaware that the presence of this R in place of L is nothing more than the linguistic mark of an African language, in which L does not exist. After all, who is ignorant? At the same time, they find so-called Brazilian speech so cool, a kind of speech which drops the final R's of verbal infinitives, which abbreviates você into se, está into tá, and so on. They are not even aware they are speaking Portuguese. End of quote. So Lélia Gonzalez, when she values the language from African people, indigenous people, she also confronts the normative grammatic, the way people write. So in her work, she deliberately will write in a colloquial way, in a very ironical way, to confront what she used to call as Euro-Christian patriarchal science. Próximo, por favor. So, with Lélia Gonzalez, I started with Lélia Gonzalez. I will finish my lecture with her words, emphasizing how much these Brazilian thinkers anticipated many debates in Black feminism, while not being a mandatory bibliography in studies on the subject due to Brazil's geopolitical position in the south of the world. So how it's important also to confront and to understand that politics of translations are also colonial politics. And these women who were thinking in Brazil needs to be also recognized when you are talking about Black feminists. That's why Lélia Gonzalez created a concept called Américanidade, proposing an Afro feminism from Latin America. Because for Lélia González, it was very important to us as people in the Latin America to look up to ourselves, to learn with our differences and similarities, and not only look up to United States or Europe, to break this epistemological dependence on the global north. And when I say that, I'm not saying that the intellectual productions on the global in the global north are not important. Is absolutely not about that. We are refusing Europe as the center of the knowledge. We are refusing the invisibilizations of the intellectual productions of the South. So that is what we are saying. So I end my lecture now, and before I do that, I'd like to show you the Plural Feminist collections. I think Breno has the slide, only to show our work here in Brazil. I will ask you for more 2 minutes to present to you. This is the Plural Feminism collection. We have already published 9 authors, male and female. Next one, please. Using didactic language and affordable prices, the Plural Feminism collection has brought pocketbooks that address critical racial themes written by Black women and men in a law-reading country. More than today, more than 200,000 books have been sold, with media repercussions, as well adoption in most undergraduate and postgraduate programs at universities. I think it's important to say that it's an independent project that I coordinate in Brazil. Next one. We are going from north to south of the country, take a non-colonial bibliography, inspiring reading clubs in peripheries and public schools to raise awareness, as well as improving political conviction, revolutionizing the publishing market in Brazil. In our events, thousands of people. In the north, 2,000 of people. In the south, 3,000 of people. In Brazil, it's a great mark. It's very important to say that. So up to now, it's not 7, it's 9 have been published. Place of Speech, that I wrote. Mass Incarceration by Juliana Borges. Empowerment by Joyce Bert. Intersectionality by Carla Cotirene. Structural Racism by Silvia Almeida. Recreational Racism by Adilson Moreira. Cultural Appropriation by Rodney William. Religious Intolerance by Sidney Nogueira. And the last one, Colorism by Alessandra Devunsky. So up to now, 9 titles have been published. And I'd like to show the Plural Feminism platform. You have, this is the photos, the books. We put the face of the photo of the author in the cover because I think it's important to show that they are Black people. And also I run in Brazil the Plural Feminist platforms. It's online platforms that are courses there. We are finishing the subtitles in English. It's also affordable in dollar. I think it's about $4 per month to have access to courses, articles, class, and the Plural Feminist platform. Breno, você pode mostrar? If you want to sign.
I was showing the website of Plural Feminist platform here.
I'm not seeing.
Did you not?
No. Well, it's the Plural Feminist platform. You can find online this online platform, and we offer courses, class, articles, and following our goal to be affordable for people, because we understand that Black people in Brazil, of course, white people also can read and do our courses, not about that. But it's affordable because we understand that most of the population do not have access to this kind of knowledge. So that's why we understand it's important to be affordable. I can send the link for your professors later. And if you are interested, we are finishing subtitles in English and also in Spanish. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Ribeiro. And we are starting to get more questions. And so if you are ready, after a brief pause, we will proceed.
Oh, I'm ready.
The first question is from Carolina, who is a PhD student in visual culture at the Universidade Federal de Goiás. And she wants to know about, I will read the question because I don't want to mis-summarize. She wants to ask, to what extent do you remain hopeful that our epistemologies from the South will become worldwide more and more considered as part of the whole dialogue, being no longer subalternized or marginalized or perceived as outsider knowledge?
Well, I don't know how hopeful I am, but I think it's important to us to continue to do our work on that. I think that is an example in Iowa University when you have, of course, Black female writers, and they present writers from the Global South. I think it's amazing when this kind of thing happens and show to us that it's possible to do it. And we have different examples in other parts of the world, but I think it's a process, and that we need to we needed to continue face it, as Laila Gonzalez did. We needed to continue doing that. I don't know if I'm hopeful or not. What I know is that there is no option to us. We need to continue doing this kind of work and to confront this dependence of the global north, and also to exchange, really. I have been in the United States several times, and I always pose these questions in these seminars for other Black feminist thinkers from the United States. Why are you not reading about us? Because here in Brazil, we are doing all the efforts to read and to publish you. I think it's important to exchange. As a woman from Candomblé, it's an Afro-Brazilian religion. There is a Orixá in Candomblé called Exu. He is the Orixá, the first Orixá. And the logic of Exu is the logic of crossroad and the logic of exchanging. So if I give it to you, and you do not give me back, you are stealing from me. So this is the logic of stealing, is the logic of colonization, and you need to break that if you are declaring ourselves as decolonial thinkers. And I think that it's very important from people that are in the global north to exchange, really exchange with us, because we are reading these people, and I think it's important to these people to create spaces to value what you are doing here.
Okay, terrific. The next question is about, this is Aaron, who wants to know if you can recommend Brazilian Black feminist filmmakers, artists, or musicians who are addressing themes similar to your work. So other people in other creative fields.
Oh, yes. Here in Brazil, there are very important Black female filmmakers, but of course, they are also struggling to have access to money to do their work. It's not easy, but I strongly recommend Camila de Moraes, who is a young Black woman. She produced a film called the Case of the Wrong Man, when she tells the stories of a man who were killed by the police during the military dictatorship. And her work is amazing. She presented her work in California a couple of years ago. Camila de Moraes, Sabrina Fidalgo, Yasmin Tainá, Juliana Vicente. There are a lot of women using the audiovisual perspective to tell our stories. And of course, I'd like to recommend a man, Jefferson D. Jefferson D is a important filmmaker in Brazil, and he produced a film of Carolina de Jesus, who is this very important writer in Brazil. I think one of the most important, and he produced a film telling her story. So these names I recommend.
Okay,
Brian, may I add something very quickly?
of course.
I think it's going to be a good follow-up for what Professor Djamila just said, because here at the University of Iowa, we are organizing at this moment with Professor Chris Harris Afro-Brazilian Symposium for filmmakers. We do not have a specific date yet, but we will update the website. So we are organizing that through the Obermann Center at the University of Iowa.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah, we have Janaína de Oliveira and Everlane de Moraes, filmmakers.
Yes, she's incredible.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, Brian.
No problem.
Thank you.
That's awesome. Since that's your event, you are more up on the details than I am. There are two questions related to lugar de fala. The first one has to do with how you see it being used, particularly in Brazil, and if it is ever misused as a concept in Brazil. And the second question has to do with what you believe would be the best translation into English, sometimes translated as place of speech, and then myself today, I suggested site of enunciation. So, those would be two questions related to lugar de fala.
Well, Lugar de Fala, it was the first book I've written, and yes, there are very misconceptions about it. In one hand, it's important because the concept became popular, but in the other hand, people, sometimes I feel that there are people that didn't understand the concept, that we are talking about social position, social locus social, and it's not a debate about individuals, but it's a debate about from the place that we are, the place that we are being part as Black women. So as Black women, we share experience because we are part of this group. So thinking about lugar de fala, for us, what interesting is to understand what are these experience that we are sharing, because we are in this particular position to be intersected by racial, class, and gender oppression. And also the contrary also true, for white man to understand the place that he occupies, the place of privilege and the place of power, and that this place is not natural, this place was social constructed. So this place was constructed in the oppressions of the other groups. It's very important for this man to understand that this place is not natural. So I think it's, yes, there are people who didn't understand. There are people that deliberate like to misunderstood some groups. But lugar de fala, it's important to name the reality of this group. And when we name it, it's important to take it off our reality of the invisibility, because the invisibility kills. An example that I bring in the book, if the Maria da Penha law is the law that criminalized domestic violence in Brazil. In 2015, when Maria da Penha law completed 10 years, there was a very important research called Violence Map. And this research showed us that in these 10 years of this law, there was a decrease of assassination of white women, but there was an increase of assassination of Black women in almost 55%. It's an absurd number. And what this showed was that there was not a race view when this law was when these people are thinking about this law. The reality of Black women was not taken as an important reality. So if you think that, of course, it's important to have this law, I'm not questioning that, but if you think that a law will solve this problem, denying that most of the Black women live in the slums, the relation with the police is a relation of suspicions, is the same police that are killing their children. These women, they cannot call the police in their communities. The relation with justice is completely different from a white person. So for us Black women, it was necessary also to increase the network centers who attend these women. It was also important to think the centers who attend these women, not only in downtown, but also in the neighborhoods, in the poor neighborhoods, because sometimes these women don't have the money to take a bus, to take the subway. So if the reality of Black women are not visible, it's not only about a concept. Intersectionality is not only a concept, it's a tool to think about public policy. And if the reality of the Black women are not put in the table, these women are not going to be benefited by public policy. We are talking about lives of people. That's why lugar de fala is so important. And we can think about the reality of Black men, of indigenous people. When you are talking about lugar de fala, it's a structural debate to name this reality and to confront the invisibility, to confront this universal perspective. I had the opportunity to work as a Deputy Secretary of Human Rights in 2016, and it was very hard to me. It was important, but very hard, because these spaces are white male dominated. And usually these people say, oh, our government is for everybody, but who is everybody? People are not an abstract mass. People are marked by oppression. So if I don't name the reality of Black women, I'm not going to think about Black women when I'm going to develop a public policy. If I don't think about Black people. So in São Paulo, which is a huge city, São Paulo, there is different São Paulos inside São Paulo. So your government is for Jardim Angela, which is a very poor neighborhood in São Paulo, or your government is for Jardins, which is a very rich neighborhood in São Paulo. So we need to think about Jardins or Jardim Angela when we think about public policy. So that's why lugar de fala is so important also too, because we're talking about lives of people. That's why races, sexes are not a specific discussion. These are structural discussion. So it's also important to say that it's not enough to create a secretary for women and a secretary for Black people. Of course, it's important to do that, to have a specific problems, but usually people think, oh, now the problems are solved, to have a secretary for women and for Black people. But they don't think in an intersectional way. So if Black people are the majority of the population who are homeless, who live in slums, when I am thinking public policy in terms of housing, I need to think about racism. It's not a specific, it's a structure. When I think about health, if today in Brazil, Black people are dying 5 times more than white people during the pandemic, it's because Black people depends more on the public health system. So to improve the health system in Brazil, it's an anti-racist public policy. So I think people need to understand that is not specific, and how to speak about lugar de fala is important in this meaning. And about the translation, yes, in Spanish, for example, it's lugar de enunciación. I think maybe enunciation can be better to people understand the concept. I think in Brazil, lugar de fala, maybe fala, people sometimes do not understand that we are talking about enunciation. So I think enunciation is I think it's the better translation.
Okay, so we have a question next from one of our own students, Joseph, who communicated with you through Instagram earlier. And Joseph is a quite engaging and wonderful student. His family is Puerto Rican, and he says in his question that his family has a strong family tradition in Santeria, and he is curious to know how candomblé informs your work.
Thank you for your question, Joseph. Santeria, I know a little bit about Santeria. It's similar to candomblé in Brazil. I was raised in candomblé religion since I was a kid. I was initiated to have rituals of initiation in candomblé. I was initiated when I was 8 years old. But as candomblé is a marginalized religion in Brazil, it was very difficult to me to assume the religion in my life when I was younger. I remember that when I came back to school after the initiation ritual, I was wearing the clothes. We wear turban, white clothes, because they shave our head, we shave our hair in this ritual. And I remember that was in school, and a boy took it off, my turban, in front of all the kids. And for me, that experience was so traumatic that for a long time, I tried to deny the religion in my life, because there is a very important intellectual in Brazil who is also a Baba Lorixá, who is a priest of Candomblé, Sidney Nogueira, that he says that when you put letters of Blackness, more you are discriminated. So sometimes Black people try to deny the religion to avoid being more discriminated. So for me, it was very difficult to deal with that. When I was a child, my mom was very continent, so I didn't have choice. I had to go. It's your religion, that's it. But when my mom died, I was 20 years, so I stayed a long time away from Candomblé. I came back years after my mom have died, have passed away, and for me it was very important, this reconnection and how the racism and the colonialism put me a part of my religion when I was younger. And for me today, how it's not possible for me to separate this dimension of my life, the way I think, the way I live. Candomblé is not only about a religion, it's a way of life, the way we see, the way we share our lives. So impact it in a very strong way, my work. And I think it's very important to highlight how Lélia Gonzalez, Sueli Carneiro, Afro-Brazilian feminists used candomblé in their work. So Lélia Gonzalez, she has a piece on Oxum, who is a Orixá. Sueli Carneiro has a piece talking about the power of female Orixás in candomblé, how the candomblé influenced the thought of Black Brazilian feminists in general. So I have pieces about Nhançã Oiá, that's this a warrior Orixá, and I have pieces on Oxóssi, who is my Orixá. So impacts my life and my work. And to finish, I think it's very important how Candomblé bring it to us another possibility of feminine. So the hegemonic feminists see, for example, the place of motherhood as only in the perspective of oppression. Of course it is. When you don't have choice, when we cannot choose if we want to be mothers or not. In Brazil, abortion, the criminalization of abortion does not allow women to choose. Of course that is. But if you see through the perspective of female orixás, Oxum, for example, she's a mother, but there is a history about Oxum that says that before taking care of their children, Oxum takes care of herself. So Oxum teaches another kind of motherhood. She teaches us, yes, you can be mother, but you are still a woman. You are still a human being. Look to yourself, take care of yourself. The motherhood doesn't need to be this imposition of forgive about yourself. Nhançã, for example, she's a mother, but she's not a mother who stay at home. She's a mother that go to the market to work and to provide their children. So you can find another kind of possibility of motherhood that you cannot feel guilty because you are a woman, that you are in the market and living, working to provide your children. So the logic of the E, instead the logic of the or, because or you are a woman and you are a mother who works, or you are a mother who stay at home, or you have to feel guilty because you are not at home. This crossroad logic that Candomblé teaches, that you can be a mother and a working woman, and you can go out with your friends, and you do not need to choose a part of who you are. You can be different parts. So even in my feminist production, Candomblé is very important. When I think Candomblé, through this geography of reason, through these examples and possibilities that the Orishas give to us.
Great. Okay, we have a lot of wonderful comments thanking you. And several more questions, but I think maybe we will just ask a couple more so that we will stay within our allotted time frame. There is a question I want to read more in its entirety because it's I don't want to mess up any part of it. This is from Fernanda, who lives in Cambridge in the United Kingdom. And she says, my name is Fernanda. I live in Cambridge, UK. I'm a Black Brazilian woman who has discovered myself as a Black woman after coming to live in the UK. Professor Djamila's work and Feminismos Plurais has been a very important support to me to reinvent myself in a new society. I would like to ask Professor Djamila, how does she manage to keep going under this terrible Brazilian government? Sincerely, I feel ashamed of being Brazilian at this moment. What is her secret to keep going?
Well, Fernanda, first of all, I'm glad to know that the books are helping you to understand your places as a Black woman. I'm very glad to know. Well, yes, we are living under a very terrible government in Brazil. I don't have names to, it's difficult sometimes to name what we're facing here in Brazil. But I think that it's the secret, there is no secret. And I think that I don't give up maybe because I am a woman that has hope, because I believe that several women before us, they paved the way for us. For us, as Black women, when was not difficult in Brazil? I think about the slavery time. I think about the quilombos. I think about people who decided to create the quilombos, who decided to say we are not going to be slaves. And I remember Quilombo dos Palmares, which was, I think, one of the famous quilombos in Brazil. For almost 150 years, Quilombo de Palmares existed, confront Portugal. So when I am very sad, and I think it's important to say that because you are activists, but you are human being, and sometimes people don't see Black women as human being. They think that you have always to fight all the time. You know, I am a human being. I don't want to be vulnerable, and I don't want to be God. I want to be human. And yes, I get tired a lot of times, but when I get tired, I try to remember these people who came before us and who paved the way for us, even in a more difficult time like the slavery time. And as Laila Gonzalez says, our legacy is not only about pain. So I think it's very important to us to believe in that and try to be inspired by these women and try to continue the work, of course, respecting ourselves, saying when you are not fine, it's okay, you're not fine, take care of yourself. The self-care, as Audre Lorde used to say, is revolutionary. And I think it's very important for us as Black women to take care of ourselves. And I do that today. My mom couldn't do that. My grandmother couldn't do that. Both of them were domestic workers. This cycle was broken in my generation. So even to honor these women, I say today that I'm going to take care of myself. So for me, all these dimensions are important, the spiritual dimension, the emotional dimension, and to take care of these dimensions for me to go on, and also to understand that where there is power, there is resistance. Brazil, yes, is about Bolsonaro and all this madness that we are living, but not only about that. Brazil is about Carla Cotirene, who is a very important thinker in Salvador, Bahia. Brazil is about quilombolas people who are resistant. Brazil is about indigenous people, and I think it's important to look up to these groups and to not lose our hope, even in this very difficult time.
Maybe a couple more questions if you think you have time, Professor Ribeiro. We have another question from one of our students here at the university, Kristen, who is an anthropology student and would like to know if you could speak to some of the barriers of racism surrounding education and the access of Black girls in Brazil to education.
Yes, Brazil, in general, there are not investments, public investments in public education, the basis. The universities are the best ones in Brazil, the public university. In Brazil, public is public university. You don't pay to study in public university. I've studied in a public university, the Federal University of São Paulo. It's truly public. You don't pay for that. But usually people who have access to the best university in Brazil, which are the public universities, are the people who have studied this life in private schools. So it's this paradox that you have in Brazil. So people who have studied in public school, I used to be a teacher of a high school in Brazil, in a poor community in São Paulo. And it was terrible to be teacher in that conditions because you don't have support, there are not teachers enough. And usually in the poorest communities, the schools are the schools that receive less money from the government. So it affects directly Black people and Black girls. So there are, so we have this problem. And in the other hand, the racism and the sexism also make that some Black kids give up of the schools. It's very important to say that, especially the dark-skinned kids that give up because they are not work on that. And I think it's important to highlight that in 2003 in Brazil, a law was established, a law that in the schools were obligated to teach about Afro-Brazilian history and African history in schools. There is a law, 2003 law, a 2003 law that was established under Lula administration. This law is very important. It's a legal landmark in Brazil, but it depends on the state government, the city government. So a lot of schools are not applying this law. So we have the law, but you don't have sometimes the efforts to really implement this law in Brazil. There are some good examples in Brazil, but the majority, Brazil is a huge country, 200 million people. And sometimes in a state they are doing that, in the other state they are not doing, and that's it. It's a shame, but you have this law. So Black girls in Brazil, especially these girls who live in the poor communities, are more affected by the lack investment in education in Brazil in the basis. And that's why this group today in Brazil, Black women, the majority of the domestic workers in Brazil until today. Because if you do not create public policy to break this cycle of exclusion, this cycle will go on and go on. And to finish, I think it's important to highlight that you have affirmative actions in Brazil. The first university to adopt affirmative actions in Brazil for Black and poor people was the University of the State of Rio de Janeiro in 2001. The second one was the University of Brasilia in 2004. And you have in Brazil, in 2012, a federal law. All the federal universities have affirmative actions for Black people. Of course, under Bolsonaro administrations, they are trying to finish with these policies, but these policies were very important because you have more Black people having access to high education in Brazil, especially in these past few years in Brazil. I am a part of this generation who had access to public policies in terms of education. I'm the first person in my family to go to university. So these policies were very important to break these cycles.
Okay, well, we are at the end of our time, and we still have a number of questions and a lot of thankful comments that we will not necessarily be able to answer today. But I wanted to express an enormous amount of gratitude to everybody who came to help us and participate in this event today, and an especially huge thanks to my colleague, Cristiane Lira, who's really organized this from our side. And naturally, more thanks than I can possibly express to Djamila Ribeiro for lending us, through her time, the enormity of her experience, knowledge, and perspective. So thank you very much. Before I sign off, I wanted to let Chris say her own remarks and share with us the website, I believe, related to Feminismus Plurais, right? Okay, and Professor Ribeiro, an enormous pleasure and honor to have you with us today. Thank you very much. Muito, muito obrigado.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for this opportunity. For me, it was, again, it's also a statement of resistance to be here today. And thank you all for this opportunity.
Yeah, I just want to say one more time, thank you so much, Professor Djamila Ribeiro, for being here with us today. Thank you to the audience. Thank you to every single comment. There were like several comments, wonderful comments, one of them in Portuguese from one of our students, which was so cute, so beautiful. I was really excited about that. I can share it with you, Professor Djamila, later on from Evan Miller. But what I want to show here now, before we finish the event, is the website that I guess you were trying to show and you were unable to.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the platform Feminismus Plurais that Professor Djamila was talking about during her talk. And here you have this tab for courses. And see what she was talking about with regards to how affordable they are. And every single one of them, it's just wonderful. And I would like to make a point again that she mentioned that they are going to be with subtitles in Spanish and in Portuguese. Sorry, Spanish and English. And then one more time, Professor Djamila, thank you so much for being here today. It was wonderful. We learned so much.
Thank you, Cristiane. And I need to say how your work in Iowa is important for us, for Black female writers from the Global South. Thank you for that, to make our work visible and to break the cycle of epistemicide. Thank you so much. And I'm very glad and grateful for this opportunity. Thank you so much.
That's it.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.